It's often underestimated or goes unnoticed just how powerful it is to make a promise and to keep it. We were reminded recently of the value of doing that with God. About 16 months ago, we were invited as a church, or we discovered as a church that we might be eligible for a tax credit from the U.S. government. The tax credit's known as the Employee Retention Credit, and it was something that was offered by the U.S. government to those who went through COVID, organizations like Calvary, who suspended operations or reduced some of the things we were doing, but in submission to the government chose not to reduce staffing. So we kept ourselves at full staff because the government asked us not to lay anybody off. But we did have to reduce programming because of social distancing to try to help the disease not spread, and because we were following sort of the guidance of the government as they gave to us. Now, the Employee Retention Credit is something different than the Paycheck Protection Plan. We also did that. That was a forgivable loan that the government offered during COVID, that if you were willing to stay at full staff, they would give you a loan. And then if you did what you said you were going to do, then that loan would be forgiven. The Employee Retention Credit is different in that it's a tax credit. Basically what the government was saying, as an incentive for doing this, we want to give you back the payroll taxes that you're paying for the people who are on staff. And so we found out 16 months ago that we could apply for this. And what you did is that any quarter that you as an organization qualified, whereby you reduced programming or operations but kept it full staff during, I think, 5 quarters you could apply for, you simply told the government, this is what we did and we'd like to apply for our tax credit. Well, we prayed about it and felt like this could be something that would be good from the Lord. And so there were lots of people out there around the time that were like, oh yeah, come and let us file your ERC for you and we'll take a big chunk, and lots of kind of shady stuff around it. We decided, no, we don't want anything to do with that. We simply took our regular accountant and we paid her a good sum to be able to say, look, we want to do this right. We want to make sure that we are full of integrity. And as normally is the case with Calvary, we're pretty conservative on sort of things that we say. We're like, yeah, well, we cut this down, but not that thing, and we did this, but not that. And we tried to dot all our I's and cross all our T's, and so we submitted paperwork for 5 different quarters and got all of that in, did it in a way that I thought was really honoring to the Lord, but was honest and was in submission to what the government was asking us to do. Well, we heard back from the government after the first quarter, sort of right away, so the first quarter that we submitted, right away, and they're like, yep, you qualify. Here is $100,000 tax credit. So now they're giving us back the money that we've paid in payroll taxes. And so that came about 16 months ago, and we're like, man, that was awesome. What an unexpected blessing from the Lord. We had a budget shortfall that year, and so it just seemed reasonable as we prayed about it to apply that $100,000 that came kind of near the end of the fiscal year. We applied that to our budget, and that allowed us to make budget that year, and that was a beautiful thing. Well, as you can imagine, there was tons of fraud around this. Lots of organizations were like, oh, we'll take some money from the government. And so lots of people were applying. The government got flooded with all of these requests. And then last November, a new government was elected. And we figured that government's probably not as interested in Biden-era sort of like handouts. And so we just thought we'd not heard anything more about our 4 quarters after the first one. So we just assumed, well, that was it. And we were really grateful. I mean, $100,000, that's fantastic. And so we just didn't think about it anymore, and we got on with what we do, ministry, and the stuff that we do as a church, and heard nothing until just a couple of weeks ago. And unannounced, we received 4 checks from the U.S. government, 1 for each quarter that we had applied for, and those 4 checks totaled $1 million. So the first thing I did was cry. The second thing was just to fall down on my knees and be like, man, Lord, that is awesome. That's incredible. $1 million, and it was pretty clear, this is not from the government. It is from the government, but it's from Jesus. And he's giving us back these payroll taxes that we faithfully and honorably paid into the government, doing what the government asked us to do as much as we could. And this was an opportunity to just kind of pray and not only thank God, I just kind of had a question on my heart, which was like, Lord, nothing in your world is by accident. So why now? Why not 16 months ago? Why not 16 months from now? Why even do this at all? Lord, we're so grateful, but help us to know, Lord, you don't do anything sort of on accident. So as I'm praying and asking the Lord, Lord, this is a beautiful blessing. Where did this come from? He said, well, it's connected to a time to renew. Now, Time to Renew is our capital campaign that we're currently in. We're sort of right near the end of it. We're wrapping it up. We as a leadership got together and we looked at the fact that we have a beautiful building from the Lord, but there's lots of things that need to be replaced, chillers and elevators, parking lot has to be fixed, lots of stuff. And when we laid it all out for the next however many years, we're like, whoa, there's a lot here. And I'm not sure that we can cover this out of our budget or out of our yearly budget. So as we prayed about it, we felt compelled by the Lord to ask the congregation, for us to kind of like, hey, look, can we give this to the Lord? And so with the number we came up with after much prayer was $5 million. And $5 million wouldn't necessarily cover everything for the next however many years, but man, it would be a huge, huge blessing, get us where we needed to go and give us the opportunity to be able to put more money out of the yearly budget into reserves. So we've embarked on that project and we've asked you, hey, would you pray and would you give whatever the Lord lays on your heart? We took pledges. And by God's grace, I think like $3.6 or $7 million has been pledged and over $3 million has come in, which is an amazing amount of money. It's not all the money that we asked for, but it's an amazing amount of money. And so early on, as we were thinking about this, it just seemed right for the leadership as we were praying about this, that, hey, look, we're asking for money for our building, and we got a beautiful building. There's lots of churches out there that probably also need some help. I mean, nobody loves giving to building projects. I mean, like repair projects. We're like, what if some other churches are in the same situation that we're in? And so we made a commitment early on that we're going to take 10% of whatever the Lord gives us for this Time to Renew capital campaign, and we're going to give that to other churches. And we're going to take it and use it to help plant churches, and we're going to use it to help other churches with whatever building issues they might have. So we've been doing that. We gave money to help plant Unity Church in Detroit. Our high school students just got back from going on a missions trip literally this last week. That church didn't exist. You can clap for that. That church didn't exist in September, and now it does. It's a beautiful thing in downtown Detroit. We gave money to help a church in Ireland with a building issue they're having. We gave money to a local church here that's struggling with some parking lot issues. We're like, we know how parking lot issues go. We can give money to that. Another local church in town, we're helping them repair their roof. For one of our daughter churches, another one of our daughter churches, we sent some people as part of Renew Crew and some money to fix their ceiling. We actually have sent some money to help 2 churches with buildings in Ukraine. Just felt like, you know what, in the midst of all this darkness, there's got to be some light. And for these Christians that are trying to do church, we found with a partner of ours, we found 2 churches in Ukraine that we could bless and help them with some building stuff. So it's been super fun, but I'll be honest with you. You know, we've had about $3 million some dollars come in. That's $300,000 that we're tithing. It's pretty easy to look and go, well, we really needed $5 million and we kind of only gotten 3.7. If we didn't give away the 300,000, we would have more to fix our stuff. But we made a commitment. We made a promise. This is what we're doing. And so we've been faithful to that promise. So meanwhile, I'm praying about this $1 million and the Lord's like, hello? He's like, you're giving money to others. Do you not think I was going to take care of you? I mean, how many of you, and I'll let you raise your hand for this. How many of you have ever given to God and had him turn right around and give you back something, perhaps even more than you gave in the first place? The Lord's like, that's what we're doing here. He's like, you were faithful to do what you said you were going to do, and here is more than you gave away to others, as an acknowledgement of a blessing from heaven. Now, I tell you that because I'm like, man, we as a church, we should praise God for that. I mean, that is awesome. It's a great teachable moment that as individuals we want to give to the Lord, but as a church we've been tithing, and it's a reminder you can't outgive God. That no matter how hard you try to give him, he's always giving more in return. And I thought, man, what a beautiful lesson for us as a church collectively to be reminded of. It's always right to try to give to the Lord. But there's a second reason why I'm telling you this whole story. Oh, there's a piece I forgot. I should tell you that what we decided with the leadership of what to do with the money, for the most part, is we're putting some of it, a good portion of it, into building stuff, which makes sense. The other portion of it we felt like we were supposed to use to bless staff. It's tied to payroll taxes, and so we're in the process of doing those two things, blessing staff and putting it towards some of the maintenance and building stuff that needs to happen. But the second reason why I think it's important to tell this to you is because it's important to think about what we're about to talk about this summer, is that there is great value in making commitments and promises to God and fulfilling those. And right here, as we're beginning this series on vows that we're going to do for the summer, we have this illustration from the Lord of when you make a commitment and you keep that commitment, there is great blessing. So that's what we want to talk about this morning as we think about where we're going in the summer. We have a new summer series, and we're going to be thinking together about the power of making promises, commitments, and vows to the Lord and keeping them. So what I'd like you to do is take a Bible and turn to the book of Genesis, chapter 28. Genesis 28. In the church Bibles, that's page 22 and 23, very early on in the Bible. You're turning to Genesis 28 on page 22, but I'd like to show you a scripture from Ecclesiastes on the screen. You're like, Ecclesiastes? I thought we were done. We are done with Ecclesiastes, of course, not forever. But there was a passage in Ecclesiastes that feels like it's a launching off point for what we're going to be doing this summer, which is not in Ecclesiastes. But Solomon writes in Ecclesiastes 5, when you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin, and do not protest to the temple messenger, my vow was a mistake. Why should God be angry at what you say and destroy the work of your hands? Here Solomon is acknowledging vows are very powerful. So powerful, in fact, that they must not be taken lightly. Don't make a vow and then not fulfill it. But in very Solomon-esque like way, he's highlighted truth, but there's more to the story. The truth is, yes, it's a bad idea to make a vow and not fulfill it. But the rest of the story is, if you do make a vow and fulfill it, that's incredibly powerful. That when you say to God, here's something I want to do for you, and then actually do it, there's incredible power in that. And so that's what we're thinking about this morning and this summer, is the power of vows that we make to God. So in order to do that, we're not in Ecclesiastes 5, we're in Genesis 28, because Genesis 28 is the origin story for vows to God. What I mean is it's the first time a vow is offered to God. And so it seems useful to go back to the very first vow made to God to see why vows are so important, why the promises and commitments that we make to God when we fulfill them are so powerful. So we're in Genesis 28. This actually works out to be the origin story for three things that are all connected. I'll show them to you as we go through this story. But three things important for the history of Christianity and for the people of God, all are introduced in Genesis 28. Now, the setting for the story we're about to look at is we're talking about the life of Jacob, who is Abraham's grandson. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob has a twin brother, Esau. Jacob is the younger of the two twins. Because Esau is the older brother, he is due to receive the blessing from his father. But Jacob is a pretty ambitious young man, and at his mom's prompting, he decides he would like to steal the blessing from his father. His father is old, doesn't see very well, so Jacob dresses himself up and pretends that he is his older brother Esau, comes in to deceive his father who can't see, tells him he's Esau. The father Isaac gives Jacob the blessing. Soon as Jacob finishes receiving the blessing, Esau finds out what's happened, and he is in a murderous rage. He wants to kill Jacob. Rebekah, their mom, finds out and says to Jacob, you better run because your brother's going to kill you. And so she sends Jacob away from the promised land, the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so Jacob is on the run, leaving Beersheba, where they were all living, headed north towards Syria to get away from his brother. We pick up the story in verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Now Jacob leaves home, and on the first night, he ends up in what seems to be just kind of this random place. He's just leaving. He gives no thought to where he's going to stay. But after a full day's journey away from Beersheba, he lays down to go to sleep. He finds a spot and he lays down to go to sleep. Now, what he doesn't know is that he has just happened, coincidentally, there's no coincidences in God's world, to end up in a very special place. He doesn't know it because there's nothing to mark this place. But the reason why this place is special is some 50 or 100 years earlier, his grandfather, Abraham, stopped at this very spot. And this is the very first spot in the land where Abraham builds an altar and prays. And so it's a powerful spot. And so when Jacob arrives there, he lays down and he has a dream. And in the dream, he has this vision. We have a sort of image of it to help you think about it. It's an image of a stairway. Sometimes you hear this called Jacob's ladder, but it's probably much more accurate that it's a stairway. So Led Zeppelin is right. A stairway from Stairway to Heaven. It reaches from the earth to heaven. And in the dream, Jacob sees God at the top of the stairway. That's not shown in this sort of painting or vision. Most people don't like to show God in paintings. So God's at the top. Jacob's at the bottom, and the stairway runs from heaven to earth and from earth to heaven. And angels are ascending and descending on the staircase, on the stairway. And Jacob realizes this is indeed a special place because I've found the gateway to heaven. It's kind of like when you're in the mall and you look up, it's a 2-story mall, and you see a whole bunch of shops up on the second floor, and you're like, I really would like to go to some of those shops. You're like, how do you get up there? And you're walking around, you can't find, and then you see the escalator, you're like, oh, that's how you get from the first floor to the second floor. This is what it's like for Jacob. Jacob's known about God. He knows that God lives in heaven, but he's never actually found a way. How do you get from earth to heaven? Well, he thinks he's found it here. He's like, this is the escalator. He's sleeping, and he realizes this is the gateway to heaven. So verse 18, he does the first of our three original things in this story. Verse 18, early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. So this is the first time in the Bible that the word pillar appears. It actually is a pretty common word, and it usually gets translated in the Old Testament as either pillar or sacred stone. It shows up a lot, but this is the very first time it appears, and Jacob is the first person in biblical history to establish or to build a pillar. What he does, it's pretty simple, is he's laying on a stone, probably not that comfortable, has this dream. This dream is super impactful. And so he takes the stone that was laying down and simply stands it upright as a symbol of what he's just dreamt. It says that the stairway in his dream was resting or standing on the earth. And so Jacob takes a pillar and stands it, same word, on the ground, and it becomes a pillar. Now in English, we normally think of the word pillar as connoting strength. It holds things up. We talk about pillars here. We have some in the sanctuary this morning. When we think of pillars, we think of, like strength and power. We might say she's a pillar in the community, or we might say he's a pillar of strength. It's true that pillars go with strength, but not as much in the Bible. In the Bible, pillars represent something else. And the easiest way to see this is the most famous pillar. You're like, there's famous pillars? Yes. The most famous pillar in the Bible, the thing for which the word pillar is used most frequent, is pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud. The pillar of fire, you can show the next image, pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud were what was leading Israel through the wilderness. Now, if you think about it, a pillar of cloud is not strong. A pillar of fire is not holding anything up. What pillars do in the Bible is they connect heaven and earth. The pillar of cloud is a connection between heaven and earth. This is God leading his people through the wilderness. Now, even today, architecturally, it makes sense that pillars connect heaven and earth, but that's much more of the focus in the Bible, less on strength and more of a connection between heaven and earth. The pillar of fire shows you a connection between heaven and earth. This is true of pillars beyond even this pillar. At the temple, when Solomon builds it, there are two famous pillars out front of the temple. Next image, please. Two famous pillars out front made of bronze. You kind of see them in this artist's rendition of that. Those are freestanding pillars. They don't support anything. There's nothing on top of them. They're important. Solomon actually gives them names, Boaz and Jachin. And again, the idea is the temple is a place where earth and heaven are connected. The two pillars out front represent that. So back to our story, the very first pillar that's set up in history, in biblical history, what Jacob is doing is he's just seen a dream that heaven and earth are connected by a stairway, and he's symbolizing that with a pillar. So he sets up the pillar, and it connects architecturally, visually, heaven and earth, because this is the place where heaven and earth are connected. This is where the escalator is. This is where the stairway is. And so Jacob sets up a pillar as a monument, as a connection between heaven and earth. All right, keep going. We're going to see the second first that happens in our origin story. Verse 20. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. This is the first vow in the Bible. This is the first time anybody vows something to God. Now you might be like, really? It feels like there's lots of promises and other things going on in the Bible. Doesn't God make an oath to Abraham? And doesn't Abraham and Isaac, don't they make promises and connections and oaths with the people around them? They do. But in the Bible, a vow and an oath are related but different. An oath in the Bible can be made from God to us or between humans, and it's a guarantee. A vow in the Bible is only ever made to God. There are no vows to other people. You only vow something to God in the Bible, and it's not a guarantee, it's a voluntary commitment. I'm committing myself to do something. I'm not guaranteeing. Now, both of them are tied together because faithfulness is important. But an oath is a guarantee. A vow is a voluntary commitment made only to God. So we've had oaths before Genesis 28, but no vows. This is the first vow. And there's a reason why in our origin story that we have both the first pillar and the first vow in the same story, because they're both doing the same thing. What a pillar is doing physically, a vow is doing spiritually. The pillar connects heaven and earth, so does the vow. When Jacob says to God, I will do this in response to what you're doing for me or going to do for me, it opens up a connection between heaven and earth. That's why Solomon is like, look, these things are not to be trifled with. If you make a vow, if you make a promise, if you make a commitment to God, you are connecting yourself, earth, to heaven. Now there's a connection. You can't not do what you said you were going to do. You're connected to heaven. That would be bad. Vows and pillars do the exact same thing. Pillars do it visually. Vows do it spiritually. But when you and I make a promise, a commitment, when we tell God we're going to do something, it establishes a connection between us and God. You can think of it this way. Our commitments, our promises, our vows are a stairway between heaven and earth, connecting us with God and God with us in a unique way. Now, why is this so important? Well, for this, we have to look at the third first that happens in our story, but it's not in Genesis 28. There's a second half to our story that's in Genesis 35. So turn over just a couple of pages to the right to Genesis 35. Now, what you're turning through some years of history in Jacob's life. History in which he's living outside the promised land. He goes up into Syria. He marries 2 women. He has 12 boys and at least 1 daughter. He becomes incredibly wealthy. He's there for at least 20 years. And then at some point, he decides he wants to go back into the land that's been promised to him. It's time to go home. He's nervous about coming home because he remembers his brother wants to kill him. But when he comes home, it turns out 20 years is a long time. And his brother Esau has decided, no, I don't need to kill you anymore. And so they actually have a reconciliation, and it's a beautiful thing. And God does exactly what he promised Jacob. He takes good care of him. He provides him with lots of resources. He brings him back into the land. He protects him from Esau. And so Jacob is now living back in the land, and he's in a place called Shechem. And chapter 35, verse 1, we pick up the story. Then God said to Jacob, go up to Bethel and settle there and build an altar there to God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. God says, hey, Jacob, you made me a promise. It's time for you to go fulfill that. You were in this spot, Bethel, 20 years ago. I've done everything that I said I would do. Now you got to do what you said you would do. So God tells Jacob, go back to that same spot and fulfill your vow, fulfill your promise. So jump down to verse 14. In between is the conversation between Jacob and God about these sorts of things. We get to verse 14. Jacob's now back in Bethel where he was 20 years earlier. It says, Jacob set up a stone pillar at the place where God had talked with him. and he poured out a drink offering on it. He also poured oil on it. Jacob called the place where God had talked with him Bethel. So here he is 20 years later, goes back to the same spot. Actually, look at verse 13. I should have read this one to you. Then God went up from him at the place where he had talked with him. Again, stairway to heaven. God has come down, talked with Jacob, gone back up. And so Jacob does what he did before, which is he takes another stone and he sets it upright. Probably after 20 years, the first stone had fallen down. He sets it upright as a pillar, and then he does our third first. Did you see what he pours out on top of it? In addition to oil, he pours out a drink offering. This is the first time in the Bible that anybody gives God a drink offering. Now, drink offerings are something that show up all over the Old Testament. We don't really talk about them all that much. There's actually a decent importance to them. But for this morning, what's important about a drink offering is a drink offering was in a cup or a pitcher or a bowl, and it either was usually water or wine. And what you did with the drink offering is you just poured it out on the ground. You don't drink a drink offering, you pour out a drink offering. It's a libation offering that you pour out on the ground. The reason why it's introduced in this story is because pillars, vows, and drink offerings all go together. Pillars symbolize a physical connection between heaven and earth. Vows are a spiritual connection between heaven and earth. But notice what happens when Jacob fulfills his vow. He goes to Bethel and he pours out for the first time in human history a drink offering. Now think about what this symbolizes. You got a cup full of water that you hold in the air and then you dump it out on the ground. Imagine that you're the little plant in the dusty desert that's getting a drink offering poured on you. How do you feel about this? Great. It's supposed to symbolize life. It symbolizes rain coming from heaven. It symbolizes the goodness and blessing of God coming to the earth. We wouldn't need rain if there hadn't been sin, because the whole earth was sort of being watered by God. But when sin came in, there was a desert and dust and a dryness to the land. And so a drink offering is a symbol that when you reconnect God to the land, life flows from God to the land. This is the power of making a commitment to God, and keeping the commitment is that when you do that, the life of God pours out onto the earth. This is why vows are so important. This is why promises that we make to God are so important, is that when we make God a promise, we establish a connection between earth and heaven, between heaven and earth, and then when we fulfill what we said we were going to do, the blessings and life of God pour out through that vow into our situation. This $1 million from the U.S. government ostensibly, but ultimately from God, is a perfect illustration of this. We as a church made a commitment. You're like, well, I don't remember signing anything. We're not talking about it. You can have formal vows, you can have informal vows. But we simply said we were going to do this. That's a commitment. We made a promise to God. When Jacob says to God, I'm going to give you a tenth of everything, there's no sacrifice, there's no signing ceremony, there's nothing formal. He just says, this is what I'm going to do. We as a church did the same thing. God, whatever money you give us during a time to renew, we're going to give a tenth of that to other churches. Once we said that, we established a connection between heaven and earth. Now, Solomon says, if you don't keep it, that's really foolish. Don't do that, because you're connected to heaven. Don't play around with this. But Genesis 28 tells us that when we as a church were faithful to what we said we were going to do, even when it hurt, which is one of the reasons why I think the Lord didn't give us all the money that we needed the first time around. He's like, look, are you going to keep your promise even when you don't have all the money? By God's grace, we did. And so what did the Lord do? He just poured out blessing. This is how this works. That's what we're going to spend this summer thinking about. is different areas and different ways that we can make promises and commitments to God for the purpose of opening up this connection. Now, I would not go through this series with us as a church if I thought we were in danger of making promises and not keeping them. But I think we're to the point where we can understand if you're willing to make this commitment, if you'll make this connection and you keep that, this is one of the powerful ways that God pours out blessings into our lives. Some of these vows are more formal, like wedding vows or church membership. Some of them are more informal, just things that we say to God, what we're going to do about praying at a certain time during a day or a season that we're going to be fasting. Some of these vows are things that we come up with. Hey, this would be great. I'd love to do this for the Lord. And some things are things that the Holy Spirit directs us to do, where God is calling us to make a commitment. Whatever the situation, when you and I as Christians say to God, formally, informally, verbally, in our mind, in our hearts, however we're doing this, Lord, this is something I want to do for you in response to what you've done for me, then we establish a connection between heaven and earth. And by God's grace, when we fulfill our part, the blessings of God pour out into our land. Now, it's important up front as we get started on this that we're not talking about God as some giant genie or great vending machine that you kind of hook the tube up to and get him to pour blessings into your life. But having said that, he is a God of all blessing. He wants to bless. He loves blessing people. This is the mechanism by which he wants to bless us. And so we hear and we respond, and God says, make and fulfill your vows and see what happens. So while we don't think of God as a giant vending machine, we do think of God as the source of all blessing. Who wouldn't want to be connected to the source of all blessing? And vows, promises, commitments we make to God is a significant way we get connected to him. When we fulfill our vows by his grace, he then is free to do what he loves to do, which is to pour out his blessing. And the water that comes from heaven, the spiritual water that flows into our lives, is not just for our own personal use. It's to bless all the people around us. So this summer, this is what we're going to spend our time doing. Just going from topic to topic, thinking about different ways that we might be able to make commitments to God and keep those commitments and watch the blessings of God flow from heaven to earth.